fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark.
Welcome, everyone, to the Bigger Picture podcast, where we're going to be talking about Lemuria and Atlantis today. I'm your co-host, Shawn, with Chris.
What's up, guys?
And like I said, we're going to be talking about a doozy of a subject today, which is going to be Lemuria and Atlantis. And this is going to be fun because there's a lot of material to cover here. There's a lot of material to cover here.
Yeah, I'm just gonna give the disclaimer right now. I came to this session today with a totally different avenue of thought and information about this, and then Shawn started telling me what he had, and I was kind of just like, okay, that's what we're talking about today. So I'm probably going to be more commentary today. But I think we have a good chemistry for that. You have a lot of information.
Yeah, well, in all fairness, I am writing a book on subjects like the ones that we're covering here in the podcast. So I do have probably, I would say, at least a few more months of research and information than what you probably have. Yeah. A lot of the stuff that I've been doing, too, is it all kind of pieced together with everything we're talking about. So, yes, we can get into super detail. I don't know if we're going to get into that much detail today. Like, I'm not going to get into the very specifics. Those would be in the book.
We just got to cover the cool stuff.
Yeah, hopefully the book comes out later this year. That's my plan. And if it does, it will have everything in there in complete detail with probably even maps and things like that. But
I'm gonna pre-read it, guys. Don't worry.
The stuff that we're going to be covering today, it's going to be really cool. We are going to be disclosing some information that most people don't have or know, and for whatever reason, it just either gets lost in history, or I have no idea why, but to me it seems 100% clear, and it is there for everyone to look at, and I don't think anyone can refute this evidence, right? So I don't know, where do you want to start with this? Like, do you want to start with making people believe Atlantis was real? We could do that.
Let's start with why it became popular at all. Like, why we talk about Atlantis today. You know, like.
Right, and that was from Plato, the philosopher Plato. This was, 2,400 years ago, so 400 BC, roughly 462, I think it was BC.
Yeah, give or take.
Yeah, a couple books he wrote. I think it was the Timaeus and the Critias or whatever it is. My Latin is terrible, but it was one of those two books that he talked about Atlantis. And what's interesting about that is he didn't actually know about Atlantis at all. He actually got it from his uncle, who lived like a few generations earlier than him, and he got it from the Egyptians. Plato just kind of stumbled upon his uncle's library, saw the writings in the books or the scrolls or whatever it was, and kind of just regurgitated that back. And a lot of the things that he talked about was a city. So mainly, I guess, let's just touch upon some of the smaller things. I don't want to go into super detail with Plato, but some of the things that he talked about was there was a great city out in the Atlantic Ocean, right? 3 rings, so 3 concentric rings, so a center, like a bullseye, so like a center dot. Actually, I'll put the picture up here. So you have like an inner ring, so like an inner circle, a ring around that, and then a ring around that with the mainland around the pool of water, right? Mm-hmm. So 3 rings of water. And that's clearly described in in Plato's writings. And he also actually mentioned, and I have it written down here, that it was a 127. Wait, where'd it go? 127 stadia is the units that he used. So like that equates to about 24 kilometers across. And he mentioned that the inner circle was more of like a I guess like a religion, like the religious capital, like it was almost like the spiritual area. The second ring was like the priest area, and the third ring was like the commerce area, and then the outside ring outside of the actual water itself was just like the general population. So it was in fact a city with some type of fortification inwards in a a religion or I guess a church or whatever towards the center, and then the actual center itself was some type of metropolis of in this image that I'm showing here doesn't really depict how it is. Obviously a artist's depiction. It's nothing exactly how it would be, but Plato did describe something that looks very similar to this.
Did I lose you on TeamViewer?
Uh-oh, did you?
It said lost connection, trying to reconnect, and then it went away. So I don't know if I was still in it.
Try to see if you can reconnect. If not, I can try to boot you out.
Anyway.
But this is something that people have been speculating this whole time. Plato being a philosopher, is it just an allegory? Is it just a story, another teaching of Plato? Or was he talking about something specific? Was it an actual place? And I subscribe to the thought of being an actual place. Like it's because the way he wrote about it, it's very specific. Like he gave dimensions, he gave all these different attributes of something. And why would you go into that detail just to kind of prove a point, right? If you were to tell a story about like, oh, there's a great city called Atlantis, it's made of 3 rings, blah 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 blah, you wouldn't say it's a certain size across or a specific location or when it was, because he even said it was like 6,000 years before he lived. Like, why would you even, like, it doesn't make sense that you would do that.
Yeah.
And the fact that he didn't even know about it until he read it in his uncle's journals, and then his uncle actually got it from Egypt when he went over to Egypt and talked to the population there. They actually had it in the oral tradition. They didn't actually have it written down. It was just, they're like, oh yeah, there was a city, west of here that in an ocean, had a bunch of islands, and it eventually sank under the sea. That's the story they got from the Egyptians. So it's not even a Greek story per se. The word Atlantis would be Greek, or it actually comes from some of the Greek gods, like the Atlan and the Egyptian gods for Atan, for the Atlantic Ocean. So, but I believe, the Atlantic Ocean was probably named before Atlantis, so I'm assuming they just named it Atlantis after the fact that it was in the Atlantic Ocean, was swallowed up by the Atlantic Ocean. But I want to show you something pretty cool. And do you have your back on screen?
No, I actually lost it.
You did? Okay.
So I think I need the new ID too.
Oh boy, technical difficulties, yeah.
But which is fine. I mean, it's not imperative. We can multitask. We'll get through it.
Yep. So, do you want to talk a little bit more on Plato while I try to get this going?
I feel like in my mind we could talk
How about
specifics.
this? Page 1, read that little quote there. I think that is from Plato himself, I believe.
Okay. Here we go. So, quote, "For it is related in our records how once upon a time your state stayed the course of a mighty host, which, starting from a distant point in the Atlantic Ocean, was insolently advancing to attack the whole of Europe, and Asia to boot. For the ocean there was at the time navigable. For in front of the mouth, which you Greeks call, as you say, the Pillars of Heracles, there lay an island which was larger than Libya and Asia together, and it was possible for the travelers of that time to cross from it to the other islands, and from the islands to the whole of the continent, over against them which encompasses that veritable ocean. For all that we have here, lying within the mouth of which we speak, is evidently a haven having a narrow entrance, but that yonder is a real ocean, and the land surrounding it may most rightly be called, in the fullest and truest sense, a continent. Now, in the island of Atlantis there existed a confederation of kings, a great and marvelous power, which held sway over all the island, and over many other islands also, and parts of the continent." And then you go on to say that Plato mentions that the islands of Atlantis are continent-sized, and there are 3 total.
Right, meaning the 3 total rings.
Right.
So what's weird about that is, I don't know if how they're describing a continent because they are.
Yeah, that's kind of why I was.
Yeah. So I have a theory, and my theory doesn't have it as a continent size, but it does have it on a continent, and the continent would be Africa. So you got to remember, we're talking roughly 12 to 13,000 years ago, and the world and the Earth was a very, very different place. Oceans, they rise, they fall.
Geologically speaking,
it's much different than what it is today. And the Sahara, being the desert that covers all of North Africa right now, wasn't always a desert. And a lot of even geologists, experts today even say that it was at one point even lush jungle, and then turned into plains, and eventually into the desert that it is now. So it's one of those things where you have to kind of understand how the world was then, because it's not how it is now. And the geological aspect of this story that he's talking about, meaning it's in Africa, it's almost an ocean within the continent itself. So I have a theory, and I'm going to show it here on Google Earth, and you'll see kind of what I'm talking about and where the oceans could possibly lie. So here we have Google Earth right here, and I'm just going to zoom in on this point that I had pre-marked here, and you're going to start seeing something forming. And as we get a little bit closer, what does that kind of look like?
Are you talking about the rings?
The rings. You have that center ring there, right?
Yep.
So the middle ring, you have another ring outside and a third ring on the outside of that. So the issue is you're like, okay, this is roughly 400 kilometers from the ocean. How could this be an island? If you actually look at the structure of Africa here, right? And I want to zoom out. So I'm zoomed out. Is there a compass or a scale over here? I think 1 inch is like 300 miles or whatever. So, this span right here. So this span right here. So if you look at the red dots, that is roughly about maybe 200 miles tall. So if you were to kind of lay that over towards the ocean, you can probably fit like 2 or 2.5 of them. But if you look at and I wish I could show you my cursor in this, but I don't have it. But where it says the Reichardt structure, and you start going northeast, you see almost a mountain range. Everything west of that, so the Western Sahara, is actually a very, very low plain. And everything that is going out towards Cape Verde is also on a downslope. If the waters were higher than what they are right now, this actually would be on the upper plateau, and you can see.
It would be an island.
You can see right there, it would be an island, correct?
And I also noticed as you were zooming back out after having zoomed all the way in there, the sand.
It looks like it's pouring into the ocean.
Washed away by the water. Like some huge amount of water.
And even if I spin it around, and you can see, this desert is massive, and I don't know if this is why he was calling it continent size, where the plateau will actually extend out from where that red dot is to, let me see if I can pull that up, to where probably midway through that box. So that would actually be very large. That'd be almost roughly the size of like the Europe continent, right? He did call it larger than Asia and Europe combined, so I'm wondering if he's including South Africa and everything below it, like everything below the Congo. Meaning that would be above water still. So I don't know if he's including that in as where Atlantis is. But this, and what makes this crazy is a lot of the stories that Plato goes into, and this is more going to be in my book, the descriptions of what's there, of talking about 4 rivers combining into one. You can actually see where rivers carved out the mountain ranges and the valleys of this area. And a lot of them actually lead into the bowl, which is this Eye of Africa. So, which would actually feed which would actually feed Atlantis, fresh water. And what's interesting about this, and this is what's crazy. So, if you look down this slope here, towards the western bank. So, if you look towards the west, below the mountain, if you were to dig a well, a lot of it comes up salt water. If you were to go up the mountain and dig where that proposed Atlantis would be, you get fresh water. And there's actually a ancient well in the middle smack dab in the middle of the eye. I wonder if we could see it on the satellite. Probably not. It's just a small well. But there is a well somewhere around here that has fresh water in it to this day. So it's very possible that you could sustain life there. And 13,000 years ago, with the Earth being much different to what it is today, there isn't the vast, desert that's around you. It's very possible that there could be life there, and these could very well be islands. And I don't know, does that look like a normal structure to you? Like, it could be a failed volcano, maybe, but volcanoes usually don't go out in ripples. They usually will collapse into like a caldera. So, I just wanted to.
Very cool.
I forgot to mention.
Oh, something good.
Yes, there's something really cool about this. So, this structure, the Eye of Africa, the physical structure that I'm showing you right now on Google Earth that physically exists, is almost exactly 127 stadia across. It's 24 and a half kilometers across.
Which translated into miles, which us Americans use more, is less, right?
For miles, but you got to remember, Plato mentioned Atlantis at 127 stadia, which is 24 kilometers across. So that is pretty compelling evidence that could actually be Atlantis. It's the exact size, shape, and area, because if this was underwater or if there was water around it, it would be an island or sets of islands. It has the location, the size, and the style or the makeup of exactly what Plato was talking about.
Yeah, because if you use this marker you have on the bottom, this key on the bottom that says 10 miles for that.
Yeah, it's hard to see.
What is like an inch and a half? It looks like almost.
Yeah.
That's like half of. Oh, now you just changed it, so it's going to change. But
so there you go. It's a little bit more than 10 miles across. Let's see if I can get it. So judging by the scale, that's still on 10, yeah. So it's a little bit more than 10 miles across, which translates to close to 24 kilometers, right? So it's a very big city. It's a major city because New York is like, 30-something kilometers across, and that's a massive city.
Yeah.
Think about how many people are there. But all right, let's put into other perspective, right? So other thoughts of places where Atlantis could be, right? Cape Verde is a thought right here. I have it up in Google Maps. I don't see anything that would be that compelling as far as rings. You can see there is a small divot in the center, but I don't see any concentric rings like Plato described. And we're talking over 100 miles across for the tops of these mountains here, these underwater mountains. That's one of them. You have Azores, wherever you are. Is this the Azores here? I don't know. It's somewhere around here. Azores are thought to be one of them there. They also think that possibly somewhere around the Bermuda Triangle area could be possibly, but there's no specific spot that has the rings, right?
Right. Yeah, except that
right.
Eye of Africa.
Eye of Africa fits it perfectly. And one of the other things that Plato described in his stories were that the buildings were made of red, black, and white stone. If you were to actually go here, and I want to see if I can get some pictures of the Eye of Africa, the baseline of Eye of Africa. But if you were to go to there, like actually visit there, all the stones, there's like these little like almost brick-sized stones scattered all over the place, and they're made up of it's a certain type of rock. I can't remember the name of the rock, but it's actually red, black, and white stone, like kind of mixed together. And I'm trying to look for a good image.
What, that has the stones in them?
Yeah.
So has anybody gone here and tried to dig anything up?
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to say is there's artifacts, thousands and thousands of artifacts from here, actual tools. Let's try to get this up. So they have tools of ancient anchors, so anchors that are used to weigh down nets. There are here's a few so there's a lot of like see if I'm trying to look. There's a lot of bullshit too. So I'm trying to sift through the bullshit. So like there's like a lot of stones like this. So like arrowheads. There's like the ancient stone kind of like circular like anchors that they would put nets through, and it would weigh the nets down so that the nets would stay vertical.
Yep.
So they would float them up over the boats and then anchor them down with that. Meaning in that area, so that means there had to be some type of water in that area at some time. No buildings, all the buildings were kind of destroyed or something happened, and it kind of goes along with the story of, the ocean kind of washing away Atlantis. Because if they had brick buildings, it's going to be kind of thrown and scorn across. I'm surprised I have not found an image of that area. Let me try something else. But I don't know. It's just interesting area. It seems to fit everything that Plato talked about. And it has artifacts of... here's a decent image. Oops. What happened? So that's kind of what it sort of looks like. And you can see how, like, it's a really crappy, grainy image. But it does have... You can see how the rocks are all kind of scattered about. Like, there's just the surface rocks. Mm-hmm. On a smaller scale, like if I could find an image that's a little bit closer up, you could see the individual, like into almost brick-sized rocks. Like if you were to build like a house, it'd be nice and easy to make it out of. So I don't know. These aren't even it either. I wish I should have pulled up images beforehand, but not find anything right now.
That's all right.
But yeah, so like it's everything that he's describing, Plato's describing, not he, Plato. Everything that he got from his uncle, and everything that kind of goes together physically that's there is also kind of listed in his stories, as well as being the actual physical evidence here in Africa. So I don't know. Do you think? What are your thoughts on it? Is it?
That's got to be it.
Have I convinced you today?
Yes, that's got to be it. And the whole like freshwater well that still exists there today.
Yeah,
which probably that long ago would have provided fresh water to the whole city. You know what I mean? Like, also ties into recent news where they discovered that like far, far deep under the ground there's like another ocean, mm-hmm. and it's all fresh water.
Yep. And
they were suggesting that something could happen seismically that would make the water come out of the caves, and like the caverns or whatever, and like essentially make oceans rise or
push them up and fill in. Yeah. But there's also all over the Sahara. Like we know it was underwater at one point because all over the Sahara you find like bones of whales.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
In this actual area, in the
and again, just look at that image you showed me.
It's
seriously.
That's what I don't get. Like when you watch like shit on Discovery Channel or History Channel, and it's like the rise of Atlantis or searching for Atlantis. Why the fuck are they not just pointing right to that? I don't get that. Like
probably to distract you.
Right, and then
being totally honest.
And that brings us to our next point, right? Like, wouldn't that be like? Is this suppressed information?
And we sort of talked about this point before we started the show today. Yes, but is it intentionally suppressed? Is the thing. I don't know if it's. And maybe it's intentionally suppressed.
Right, and we might be getting ahead of ourselves here because we should probably back up and actually talk about Lemuria.
Yeah. Okay, so pre-Atlantis.
Yes, like
we get into Lemuria, which let me go through.
Right, and I want to make a fact that I hope people are on board with my Atlantis, my theory of version of Atlantis, where it is the Eye of Africa, while the Sahara was a little bit submerged underwater, given the appearance of it being islands. Now, the rings itself weren't an island, but it was more inland, and there's the plateau that's around that area would make up an island. It would be large. It'd be very, very large. Not continent size, but close to the size of like I would say like if you include like Portugal all the way up through like Germany, Poland area, probably like roughly that size if that area was underwater. So given that as a point, you have to have a little bit of belief to go into the Lemuria, because we're talking 50,000 years ago at this point. And where Lemuria is, and I'm going to pull up the same Google Earth, Lemuria was much larger. And right now I'm in the Pacific Ocean, so there's the U.S., so everyone can get themselves oriented to. I'm going to flip over to Hawaii. So I'm going to try to zoom in as much as I can without distorting it. So this is Hawaii right here. And if you actually look, you can see the topographical images on Google Earth. I'm going to get rid of the clouds. So all these are peaks and valleys all throughout the Pacific. And they create all these small islands going all the way across. So Lemuria is thought to be roughly from Hawaii all the way down to roughly the outer skirts of South America. So it'd be roughly about here, kind of going around this mountain range and up to Hawaii. And Hawaii would actually be probably the highest peak of Lemuria. So the issue with Lemuria is a lot of it is speculation. And Melchizedek is one of the bigger pushers of it. And if you've heard that name before on this podcast, it's because we talk a lot about the Anunnaki and the Sumerian religions. Well, one of my theories that I have with Lemuria is it was a physical place, as was Atlantis, as we showed you, but much older. And the same thing with the oceans rising and falling, ended up getting swallowed up by the ocean. However, there's a key factor that we're kind of missing here. And it's not the fact that their Lemurians were any different type of people. They were just people, but they had a different culture and a different mindset. And with the sinking of Lemuria, you had to have some kind of migration. Now, if you're in the Pacific Ocean, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, there's only a few places you can go. You can go to South America, you can go to the west coast of North America, you can go to the east coast of Asia, so islands of Japan, probably some of the little bit of China, obviously the South Pacific, and even Australia, right? So if you had a mass migration of, let's say, millions of people, they're going to be spread out all around the world. Mm-hmm. So what I found out from some of my research was, if you actually look at the North American, Native American cultures and their beliefs in gods, the South American beliefs in gods, the East Asians, and some of the South Pacifics, they all have very, very similar stories. When you turn the world around and now you're in the African, European, Middle Eastern side of the cultures, they don't have that. Their culture is slightly different than what the Lemurians were. And my thought of Lemuria and Atlantis was they're actually two separate major civilizations that started in the world, where Lemuria lost their home, spread and migrated through Asia, North America, South America, and South Pacific, and eventually migrated across, Asia into the Middle East, into Europe, and then eventually into Africa, meeting up with the Atlanteans. Somewhere, I would say, maybe somewhere around 2600 BC. So they have their culture kind of spreading across. So that's why you kind of get these different religions, like Hindu and Buddhist are much different than the Egyptians and the Greeks, right? With the culture clash somewhere in the Middle East, you have Egypt, right? So Egypt is kind of like today's version of Atlantis. They take on a lot of the Atlanteans. So if you look at kind of Egyptian mythology, they're more Atlantean, where Buddhism is more Lemurian, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Totally.
So my theory of Atlantis is not a fictional place. I think it's a physical place. However, the culture is different than what most people think of it. Like when you hear stories of Atlantis, they had this, massive like cities, and they had all these advanced like crystal technology, and they can, go into different dimensions and travel around the world. I don't think that is necessarily true. I think that is a Lemurian culture being opposed onto the Atlanteans, where Lemurians were very much spiritual.
Yeah, like Tibetan monks
Right.
are today.
Not, I guess, materialistic per se, where the Atlanteans were very materialistic. They were builders. They were builders, architects, mathematics, straight lines. Everything had to be perfect. And their technology is what made them great. Where the Lemurians were very round, circular. They had a different way of thinking. They were more naturalistic and more spiritual in a way where they didn't necessarily need to have large structures or, warfare in boats and things like that, where they were more in tune to nature, more in tune to themselves. The population all kind of had one goal to kind of expand their consciousness, where the Atlanteans were the other way. They were, seek and destroy, conquer, spread out.
All their power, so to speak, was in the things they created.
Yes, their technology, what they made in the physical world.
As opposed to the not the Buddhists, the
Lemurians?
I almost said Liberians. The Lemurians, who were more like Buddhists today, who, real quick, we know can do some pretty amazing things without the use of any technology. So yeah, this is where I think it starts to get cool, personally, because you start thinking about the culture of the Lemurians versus the Atlanteans, and the way of thinking and how you associate it to today.
And we had a lengthy talk about this, about America being like the new Atlantis, but yes. I don't want to get too far ahead. But so, kind of progressing the story a little bit. So, around 26,000 years ago, another catastrophic event happened, right? Now, at this point, the Earth is changing another time. I think 26,000 years ago, we're thinking it might be a polar shift. And what a polar shift is if you had, imagine the crust around the Earth kind of floating over the mantle. And the mantle will technically move underneath it, displacing the crust slightly, causing massive earthquakes and changes in the land, tectonic plates and everything like that. And we actually think that is the reason why the Sahara became the Sahara what it is now. So oceans left, receded.
It became the opposite of what it was.
Opposite of what it was. Yeah, exactly. And with that, now you had another great culture, and the Atlanteans lose their essentially home base. So now you have Lemurians and Atlanteans, these two advanced civilizations, kind of spread around the world. Well, now imagine if, it's kind of hard today because we're more of a global species than we ever were because we're all connected. But imagine if, let's say, Middle Ages England, right? England being an island, let's say that fell in the water, but obviously a few of the Englishmen or even the Scotsmen, whoever, went to mainland Europe, right? How long do you think it'll take them to rebuild their culture?
Very long time.
Very long time, right? So, and I that's kind of where I'm kind of going with this. If you take the oldest culture, the Lemurian culture, 50,000 years ago, push it towards kind of through Asia, and it keeps getting diluted every time it gets closer and closer to Atlantis. By the time it gets to Atlantis, it's almost mainly just myths and religion at that point, where Atlanteans already have and established their own beliefs in their systems, right? In their concrete mathematical culture. And then you have this weird clash of religions kind of coming through. So now we're going to fast forward to 13,000 years ago. Now you're starting to see things like the Sphinx being built, Göbekli Tepe being built, all these mega structures being built. And it's kind of a mix between Lemurian thinking, the spiritual side, and Atlantean thinking, the mathematical side. Because you're starting to align stars. You're starting to make connections to solstice. So, think of something like Stonehenge, where it's a circular round thing. But it's not 100% there. And it's because Lemuria was lost to the oceans. Atlantis was lost to the oceans. So only a few people kind of went through trying to reconnect back to where they were. But the issue is the Atlanteans were so strong in their culture that they kept on pushing their mathematical and technological ways. And that's when you start seeing the cultures of the Egyptian culture emerge, 7,000 to 6,000 years ago as a major culture. And then you have Sumeria at the exact same time emerge out of there with similar stories, but not quite the same. And then if you keep going down the timeline, what ends up happening is you keep losing gods. So it's the Atlanteans. If you were to kind of put it out on like a scale, and let's say Lemuria and Atlantean were 50-50, eventually the Atlanteans kept taking over and over and over and over and over again. So their culture kept getting pushed on, with the Lemurians' culture keeps getting suppressed. And then that's kind of where we're at today. We're roughly, 52,000 years removed from Lemuria, where we're only a few thousand years removed from the Atlantean thinking. So we are more Atlantean than we are Lemurian.
Certainly.
Right? And there's obviously a lot of stuff that I'm not going into. Like, there's a lot more that I'm going to be writing in the book, but for the sake of time, I'm just trying to keep this as simple as possible. And it might not make sense right away, but when you start kind of looking at it and you look at the migration patterns of people, the migration patterns of the oceans, where, like, exactly, when you're kind of looking at the Eye of Africa, it's hard to refute that why isn't that Atlantis? Like, it's there. There was structures at one point. We know there was ancient humans there at one point, and we know there was fresh water.
Like, that doesn't look natural at all.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Not at all, right? We know there's physical evidence there. Lemuria is a little bit of a stretch. However, we do know that, things like Easter Island, like, how do you explain the heads, right? The Moai? Like, things like that. Like, that is more Lemurian than it would be Atlantean. And what I mean by Lemurian and Atlantean, if you think of it in a left-right brain perspective, where the left brain is more male, more mathematical, more logical.
Problem solving.
Yep. The right brain would be more female. It's more spherical, round, naturalistic, right? Has a very wholeness to it, a very spiritual aspect. You need both. Right? Because you can't have technology without the left brain. You can't have spirituality without the right brain. However, if you have strong dominances of each, it gets out of balance. And then that's when you're starting to see the cultures collide. The Lemurian and the Atlantean culture. The issue with this is Lemurian culture being much older, more spiritual, less dominant, kind of got suppressed and thrown away by the Atlantean culture, being more strong-headed and left brain and mathematical.
Like I said, the way you are laying all this out is making it very believable. It's like hard to argue with.
Yeah,
not that I'm the type of person that would want to argue with.
No, but I'm trying to lay down facts. Like, if you go back to even talk about like the Great Floods, right? Like, every major religion has a story about a great flood. Mm-hmm. It's there. It's all there. The oceans rise. They fall. They do different things. Tectonic plates happen. There's tsunamis. Places get wiped out. We even know, Vesuvius for volcanoes. Shit happens. Civilizations, cities get lost. And when you start talking about like a civilization, it's hard to imagine right now because we're such a large, 7.5 billion people in the world. Back then, there might have been 7 million, right?
Yeah.
It's when you're talking like wiping out a civilization, we're talking, a few million people. We're not talking billions of people. It's a different story today than would have been back then. The Spanish flu took out like 120 million people. Today, that's a significant number, right? It's a lot of people.
Yeah.
But it's what, like 1% of the population?
Yeah, but back then, that was like...
That was the entire population. It was like everyone. Yeah. So it's because I think it was up to the Industrial Revolution. We haven't even reached the billion yet. And then after the Industrial Revolution, that's when we started essentially exponentially growing in population. Yeah, so we had lights. We could see in the dark. But yeah, it's so, an entire civilization, the Atlanteans or the Lemurians could have been, let's say, 1 million people strung across, from Hawaii all the way down, a chain of islands all the way down to the west coast of South America. We're not talking a huge population, but enough people to make a culture and a civilization possible.
It's a strong theory, man. I mean, Lemuria being there, you know what? It's it's not anything geological that really suggests that Lemuria really was there. It's more
Right.
the migration of the Lemurians.
It's
that
the culture.
makes sense. Like,
Yes.
if you think about the areas you were talking about them migrating to, they all do have very similar kinds of religions, very more spiritual, like nature balanced. You know what I mean? Not like America today, or like Rome, or like some of the other civilizations that have popped up throughout time, and religions like these. You were saying they have many gods and stuff, and it's just, oh my God, I'm overflowing with information right now. It's
yeah.
awesome.
So I made the point, we were talking earlier before the show, how the Lemurians had a higher spirituality. They had a higher connection to consciousness. Now, and this is going, this will be a lot deeper in my book, per se. But imagine connecting to like a higher power and receiving knowledge down from that power, right? You're not necessarily meeting a physical person. You're kind of meeting another entity through consciousness. Correct. If you were to able to get information from that and bring it back down to, I guess, to the general population of whatever culture you're in, you have to try to perceive what you saw or what you heard or what you learned and bring it into the culture. And that ends up being gods, essentially, right? Like if I went to, I don't know, if I went to somewhere, the Akashic Record, I met you and you gave me some information, be like, hey, this is where Atlantis was. And I come back and I try to describe who you were, but you didn't form like a human body. You were just something or some part of consciousness. Maybe you came to me as an animal, right? Because maybe that's what I perceive and recognize.
Yeah, you perceive me as something that in your psyche and mind represented knowledge or wisdom or something.
Similar to when European colonists went to the Americas, right? The natives perceived it as dragons on the water, or they perceived it as floating. They're floating over the clouds, like the big white sails. They were perceiving the ships as, because they never seen a tall ship before. They're perceiving the ships as something that they can relate to. So now when you start looking at the old religions, a lot of the oldest religions, like if you go back to like the Sumerians, to the Egyptians, and you start going further beyond that, there's always a pantheon of gods. There's always multiple gods. And my belief is they're not necessarily physical beings or gods of, it's not a god of war, a god of love, a god of the ocean. They're consciousness in the next dimension giving you information, yet we're perceiving it as, hey, this god gave me this information about this. And then we put them into stone statues or on inscriptions on walls, into stories, but we perceive him as, yes, he's the sun god, or he's the moon goddess, or, that's when you start having these stories, because the stories make more sense than trying to give out, let's say, a mathematic formula. And the more you kind of go through the religions, and the closer you get to Atlantis in that time frame, the more gods drop off the pantheon. And it's not until I guess the major religions today, like Islam and Catholicism and Christianity and all of them, they're all monotheistic. They all have one god. And that is a very Atlantean way of thinking, singular, right? So binary, it's either 1 or 0. Right? You can't have many of something. You can't have a variety of something. There's only one. And a lot of that stems from the fact that we've suppressed a lot of the Lemurian culture and kind of took on the Atlantean culture for whatever reason.
Based on the information you've given us today, I think that's very true.
Yeah, and then there's, if you wanted to go deeper into like the story and the myths of Lemuria about us falling out of consciousness, like there's a lot of cool stories out there, like Melchizedek, who I don't really subscribe a lot to his work, but he is very popular out there, and he subscribed to the fact that Lemuria was invaded by the Atlanteans, and they fell from consciousness down to back down to the base level, and they had to work their way back up. And then the Grandmasters were kind of like, let them have their own thing and make their way through it. But one of the things that he has out there is we only have 13,000 years to complete the tasks. And you always hear this out there. It's like we're a civilization that has amnesia, right? We forgot our own past. We forget how we came or how we became who we are now. And a lot of that has to do with these events, these cataclysmic events, meaning like the pole shift that destroyed Atlantis, destroyed, Lemuria. And every time that happens, we have to reset back to zero and then try to build it up again. If you actually follow the timeline, and you know how like the Mayan calendar it ended on 2012, what if that is our set, like our reset? Like this is our reset, and this is like the new beginning for us learning how to be more Lemurian, to elevate our consciousness. Because if you go back 13,000 years ago, that's roughly when the Great Flood was. And if you go back 13,000 years before that, is when you had the pole shifts. And if you go 13,000 years before that, there's another cataclysmic event. And it's almost like every 13,000 years, there's something that's happening that's changing the world. So where we at right now in 2018, we would be in the genesis of this new era, this new way of thinking, this awakening, trying to get to the next level of consciousness.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and I mean, metaphorically speaking, like, a great flood could represent a great, a great flood of a new consciousness. You know what I mean? Like,
it's a deluge of ideas, maybe. It's a wiping away of old ideas, maybe, and introducing new ones, or wiping away the wrong ideas and trying to reset to get to the new place.
I'm going down a serious rabbit hole in my brain right now. And this will take 2 minutes, but check this out. So, 13,000 years. So let's say the first 13,000 years cataclysmic event is the tectonic plates thing. Something goes crazy, there's a polar shift, it totally throws all the continents out of whack. Maybe that's when Pangea, just for shits and giggles, breaks apart. And, maybe forms Lemuria, like...
Well, you're talking millions of years.
Yeah, whatever. Fuck it. Alright, let's scratch the Pangea thing then, because I don't want to go that far back.
That's real far back.
Okay.
But, let me interject one time. If you go back 13,000 years ago, right, that's the end of the Ice Age. So something happened. So something changed in the Earth. My theory is...
Caused the Great Flood.
Yep, comet.
The Ice Age.
Comet hits northern Canada, melts a shit ton of ice, raises sea levels, fucking sinks, right? Atlantis, boom, into the water, dies. And then
let's go 13,000 years before the Ice Age.
That's when they had the polar shift. Or that's when the belief of the polar shift is.
Okay, so this is what I'm saying. Okay, so the first one is the polar shift.
Yeah.
Then the second one, 13,000 years, is the Great Flood.
Yep.
And then the third one was supposed to happen in 2012.
Well,
according to the
theory
that we're playing with right now.
Yeah.
And now it's a spread and of a wave of a new consciousness. Because, I mean, that is kind of when I feel like it really started, that new wave consciousness vibe, or whatever you want to call it, started rolling and snowballing.
Right.
And this is interesting to me, because if we go on the idea of collective consciousness, just like we've talked about in this episode, past episodes,
pretty much every episode, yeah.
Yeah. The consciousness is directly related to the things bigger than us.
Yes.
I immediately think of the universe, but let's just think about the Earth.
Right. Type 1 civilization.
Well, yeah, but it's almost like the 13,000 year event is evolving, and at first it was very like geological, and I think of that as like a lower consciousness, if that makes any sense.
Yes, yeah.
And then the Ice Age, you get up to a little bit, and the Great Flood, that is a little higher, and now we're at this stage where we're talking about the consciousness being spreading, and that's even higher. Are you picking up anything that I'm dropping?
I get what you're saying, but there's one problem with that, is we're still Atlantean thinking. We're like 90% Atlantean thinking.
Absolutely. But maybe that's when the ball hit the peak, and then now we're starting to go back, you know, and you start from the top, so like, yeah, we're gonna be more Atlantean thinking for a long time, but
right.
Just to say this isn't the beginning of when we start shifting back to the Lemurian way of thinking.
Right. And one of the things I've been playing around with is I'm looking at the timelines and seeing how it works. And if you actually take the internet, right, the invention of the internet, which would have been like in the 80s, gained popularity in the late 90s, pretty much full-blown, everyone around the world has access some way or another to the internet around now, right? There are obviously some people that don't even have electricity, and that sucks. Yeah. But most of the populations around the world have access to the internet. Is that the next level that we're trying to achieve Atlantean style? Meaning, instead of going spiritually, we're trying to go mechanically.
It kind of does seem that way, because if you think about how people act on the internet now,
it's so weird.
Very like me, my opinion is fact. Like,
yes, my opinion is fact. Atlantis is real.
Yeah.
It's not a theory. It is real. I'll debate anybody.
But seriously, like, think about it, like Yelp or for shits and gigs.
But not even that. It's like how much misinformation was there before the internet, and how much there is now. Like I feel like only a few decades ago, this stuff that we're talking about right now, look, these are my notes. This is barely anything of notes, right, that I've been doing.
But it's so much more than you would have found.
It's exactly because people are talking about this now, right? And is this the awakening of the more Lemurian side of consciousness? I feel like
I don't think the internet has to do with Lemurian. I think the internet is still very Atlantean.
Right, but I think, 100, 200, 300 years from now, where we're all connected to each other through the internet, through a mechanical consciousness, essentially, would we start kind of going more spiritual after that point? Because now we have this connection. Would we be able to find ourselves going, I guess there's two paths you could take. Would you go, I guess, mechanical side or spiritual side? Because if we have the internet and it's awesome, what's the next evolution? VR, right? You put the VR goggles on, and then, instead of us being in a room together, I could be on the other side of the world and we would feel like we're in the room together doing this podcast, right? Is that the next step mechanical wise? Or would they start being, okay, I feel the connection, we're all kind of one, and then we start thinking as, rather than there's Russia, North Korea, and America, and then Venezuela and Mexico, are we just humans? Like, are we just Earth? Because now we're all connected. Because of the internet. Yes, but... Because it makes the world a lot smaller.
I see what you're saying, but I feel like it still makes it so that we create this other platform of consciousness. You know what I mean? Like, we created that with an Atlantean brain, or
with a Lemurian
brain.
With an Atlantean
style of thinking, like
tool.
Right.
Yeah.
But can it be? I guess my question is, can it be the proper Lemurian quote unquote way of thinking if you're using the internet? Like, you're not. What if if you need the internet to feel connected by everyone to everyone and a part of everyone and the same and united, is that real? Is that feeling real, or is that like, some weird veil that your Atlantean or ego side of your mind has created? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I get you what you're trying to say. I don't know because
I think it's possible what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm just throwing ideas out there right now. Like, I'm doing a lot of research, and the more research I'm doing, it feels. I guess it goes back to the monotheistic religions, because when you had all these polytheistic religions, you had all these gods, essentially teachers, right? They weren't even gods; they were teachers of things. Like, this god taught me this god taught me that, or you look to the gods to learn information, and then it became God is everything, God is Almighty, right? Interesting story about the first pharaoh of Egypt, Akhenaten. He was a very spiritual guy. Before then, they had religion, right? So they had gods that people looked up to, and things that they had to do to appease the gods, right? When Akhenaten came around, he was thought to have ascended to the next dimension, to the next level, brought back information with him, but then amongst his own people, he said, "Hey, you don't need to believe in the gods. We all have it within ourselves. We all are God. We're all the same consciousness. You just have to have that belief in the spirituality to reach that level, like I did." Well, he ended up getting killed by the priest of the other gods, because you're like, "What the fuck, motherfucker? You're taking away our power, because we have no power anymore. Nobody wants to come to our temples and give us donations and sacrifices." So we're like, "Okay, well, screw you. We're going to kill you. Atlantean thinking, take over. And no, we're going to oppose our gods." So after that might have been like the last historical, I guess that's a pivot point, because it was the struggle between the Lemurian thinking, where Akhenaten ascended, came back and told everyone, "No, we're all kings. We're all gods, right? We have everything within ourselves. We just have to achieve it, right?" And then the Atlantean thinking, the priests were like, no, you're taking away our power. Kill him, get rid of him, go do it our way, right? And then and that's what I was saying. Like, the closer and closer you get to now, the closer and closer we are to Atlantis, to Atlantean thinking. Right? It's weird, and it lines up historically. It lines up, as far as religious kind of sects go. They all kind of link back to it as well.
Yeah, I'm sold.
And if you take the stories of Christianity, Islam, they're basically the same with minor differences, right? I don't want to offend anyone, but they have similar origins, similar stories, similar gods, but they all discredit the other gods, right? They all say, no, the other gods are crap, they're bullshit. Do this, and then this is our god. This is the way we're gonna do it, and and we're the right way, and you're gonna do it our way. And then they took over. Atlantean thinking is very strong. It's very powerful. It's very brash, in your face. They are a culture of take everything you can and hoard it to yourselves and make yourselves better, right? They're not. The Lemurian thing is more circular. It's more round. It's balanced. You have to have the good. You have to have the bad. You have to have, you have to be able to relate to the person next to you and love thy neighbor. Right? Yes, that's in Christianity and things like that, but not to the sense of, if you discredit God, then God will smite you. That's still there, and that's the problem. But if you look at cultures after the great religions, look at Rome, right? Rome is essentially Atlantis 2.0, right? They went out, they conquered much of the world. Same thing with Persia. They went out, conquered much of the world. Atlantean thinking, which surfaced out of northern Africa. So if you push migration, northern Africa into the Middle East and into Europe, those are essentially Atlanteans going up and through, spreading their culture, and that's why you have the culture it is. I would say Great Britain, the colonial Great Britain, was probably Atlantis 3.0, where they pretty much conquered the entire world at that point. And then now Atlantis 4.0 would be America, I would say, right? Because we are the superpower in the world. Yeah. The things that we do, most other cultures follow us, unfortunately, follow us on some things. But it's when you start tracking the migration of not just the people, but the cultures, it starts to make sense. And Atlantis is actually alive and real today. And we are all descendants of Atlanteans. Because that's the culture, not the city. Even though I did show you the city and where it was. Not the city, but the culture itself. Yeah. And we're definitely descendants of that. And we lost the Lemurian culture. And we lost that I guess Asia has more of that in their religions, in the Buddhist religion, because things like the balance, the black has to have the white, the good, the evil, the yin, the yang.
Yeah, And I mean, if you even just look at a lot of Asian cities, they're very integrated with nature.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's not just New York.
Yep. Yeah. Oh God.
Like, it's very integrated with nature, and that is, again, I think, a more Lemurian
Right.
way of,
Same. Look at the South Pacific. Look at their culture, right? Look at them. Look at the like the Mayan. Look at the Inca. They were deep in jungles. Like, they built cities in jungles. They didn't clear cut jungles away and things like that. They built temples, but they also built temples around certain sacred sites. But they didn't disturb the nature, the culture of it, right? And even the same thing with northern Native Americans, right? They peace and harmony. They never, when the Europeans came to America, we literally just killed them and took the land and everything. But they were accepting of us at start until we started killing them. But when we came over, there's documentation of saying, like, yes, they lived with the land. They were, we perceived them as, I say we as in Europeans, not my people personally, but or Atlanteans. We as Atlanteans came over, took the land, but we saw them living on the land in peace and harmony, right? They had warring cultures between themselves, but they all understood that nature and earth was the god, essentially, the number one thing to take care of. And of course, you're always going to have small spats between groups here and there because some things are going to change. And that could just been the migration of maybe one culture of Lemurians versus another culture of Lemurians that went different ways during the sinking of Lemuria, right? Because South America is a little bit different than North America, which is different from Asia. However, they all kind of look the same.
Man, you really overloaded me with information today.
But it's
good information too.
It's cool to think and to theorize all this stuff, like, and to lay it all out. And the more you go down the hole, and the more that you learn about, the more connections there are.
That's the best part about all this, and that's why I love talking about this stuff, because you start realizing they're all interconnected in some way. Like, literally, like everything from friggin' Atlantis, which is very long ago, to like the Freemasons today. Like, all of it is connected.
Yeah. Well, Francis Bacon, Freemason, right, in the early 1500s, I believe, wrote about how America was the new Atlantis. And if you actually look at America now, a lot of the major cities are laid out by the Masons. So I'm wondering if either they're part of, or if they know more about Atlantis than we do, meaning they're more in tune to the, I guess, the great history of Atlantis.
Wouldn't doubt it.
Right?
Very secret society.
And he could have just been writing about Atlantis because to him would have been fictional from Plato, and he could have just been added onto it, the New Atlantis. But it truly is the New Atlantis.
Also, I mean, if he were to, that's essentially disclosing information that you learn within the Freemasons. Like, if he were to do that and that were to be a big deal, wouldn't the Freemasons, like, have done something to him? Like,
I don't know. No, because 1500s it really wasn't. You had to be in a secret sect because the Christianity was taken over, and if you weren't a 100% belief in Christianity, then they would just kill you.
Yeah, Christianity rules.
So it's one of those things where I don't know. It's kind of like I don't know, because the Freemasons have a very strong mathematic presence about them. So don't the Atlanteans. So it's kind of a mix of both. But could he have been kind of hinting at, hey, maybe there is more, maybe we should learn from Atlantis instead of being so left brain? Try to make the new world, meaning America, make the new world kind of 50-50, make a little bit left, make a little bit of right. And they were trying to do that with the freedom of the people, our government. However, I feel like we're falling back into the Atlantean ways.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Totally. We totally are. Look at, like, shutting down all the national parks and...
Right. We're, like, look at this current administration right now in America, the Trump administration.
Yeah, I wasn't going to go...
We have to
start saying names.
But it's you start thinking about it, like we're taking business over everything else. Like,
yeah, look who the president is.
Right, exactly.
He's a businessman.
He's a businessman that is very hard on people he deals with. Like, it's his way or the highway. Like, he's been known to put people in places where he knows he's going to corner them, and the only way out is to get out the way he wants you to get out, which is an Atlantean way of thinking. It's binary. It's my way or the other way, right? It's my way or no way. It's 1 or 0. And we are moving more towards that way of thinking here in America, too, because, you know, everyone's America first. You know, we're going to lead and you follow, and we're going to do it this way. Obviously, there are other major players around the world, like China's starting to come up with their economy and their government and their presence. But again, they're a dictatorship, right? It's still an Atlantean way of thinking, so it's not any different than what it is right now. And I honestly think it's going to take something major. In hopefully, it's not another cataclysm, but maybe it's something like maybe a fault of somebody or a mistake of somebody, or maybe. How cool would it be if there was an extraterrestrial visitation and it was live on TV around the world, on the internet, everyone saw it, and they blew up a building or whatever, right? They blew up the Hoover Dam. Why not, right? They blew up the Hoover Dam, and now everyone around the world is like, what the fuck? Okay, now we have to fight aliens. And maybe that brings us together. Who knows?
Yeah, that would be scary if they blew up the Hoover Dam. I was hoping more like, hey, you people need to wake up, like, be more like this, and everyone goes, wow, you're super powerful.
I honestly don't think that would ever happen, because I think whoever gets the information first will try to keep it to themselves and suppress it. Meaning, like,
here's
governments.
the thing. I think that,
because they obviously know way more than we do.
This is a different show, Shawn.
Yeah,
if we're being serious, I think that the government talks to aliens right now. So,
I do too, but I don't think they talk to them, like, they don't pick up a phone and be like, hey, what's up?
I don't think it's like that.
I still think it's through the next dimension, the Akashic record, or some form of a dimensional phone call.
Dimensional phone call?
Yeah, dimensional phone call. Meaning there's got to be, like, some type of way to contact, because, like, we don't have the technology, and I bet you could scream up and down, like, yeah, the military has technology you've never heard of, but based on physics that we have today and what we know of, we don't have the technology to translate and transfer information across galaxies. We don't have that right now, right? So the only way you could do it is if you could bend space-time or dimensionally, like through like a wormhole or something like that, right? But why not do the same thing the way the Lemurians did, access your consciousness and perceive the information that way? Because you could, there's definitely something in humans that can do that. So there were studies before. It's in Japan. There's a set of monkeys, right? They would take the sweet potatoes and we would throw the sweet potatoes into the sand. Monkeys will go grab the sweet potatoes, eat them, spit out the sand. Oh, that's gross. Eat again. Sand. Some of the monkeys figured out, okay, if you wash the potatoes off in water, sand comes off it, then you can eat it, right? So a few generations go by, and then you start seeing monkeys on this island all starting to do it, right? So eventually, it was a learned culture, it was a learned thing. So, you know, one monkey might have did it, maybe passed it on to his children. His children had more children and more children. And eventually, the entire island was based off of that one monkey that had the idea. So this is a real study. All of a sudden, for whatever reason, monkeys in adjacent islands all started doing the same thing.
With totally different bloodlines.
Totally different bloodlines, never in contact with the other monkeys in this study. Because in the study, they have them quarantined in the area where they can control them. But some reason, some way, monkeys around in, like, we're talking span of miles, like hundreds of miles, like, they understood, okay, now if you just wash the sweet potato off, there's no sand on it, you can eat the sweet potato.
But not until that first group of monkeys all knew how to do it.
Not until the entire group of monkeys knew how to do it. So it's almost like that group reached a level of consciousness and transferred information somehow to other monkeys adjacent. So it's interesting to think if that's the same way how we communicate today. Like, because there definitely are animals that can communicate without talking or without making a sound, or like they know
Oh, yeah.
things without talking. Like it's weird because like I have two dogs, and when you watch my two dogs interact, like they know things, they communicate without even making a sound. Like obviously they have patterns, and they know like one dog does one thing and the other, behavior patterns, and maybe slight movements of the body they can read, but they still have a way of communicating without actually talking, and they definitely do it. And there's animals all around the world that do it. So is that tapping into that collective consciousness? And we're not talking just humans here. Like everything has consciousness.
Right. And I mean,
We're just that different. We're at a higher level.
If anybody has ever experienced a point where you like just get like a feeling like something's wrong, and then X amount of time later find out that when you were feeling that feeling, this happened, and you're like, oh my god, like like a relative dies, or like lots of parents, if their child gets in an accident, and dies, like a lot of mothers specifically, more Lemurian thinking species, get a sense of like sadness, like they know without having to be there that something happens, which kind of relates to this 100 monkey experiment and like being universal consciousness.
Yeah.
Cool stuff.
Yeah, and there's like the twin theory, like twins can they have like a connection that normal people don't have. And I don't know if that's just having similar genetics, like are you in the same frequency as your twin? But there's always been like the stories like one twin would be going to work and the other twin is going to work and gets in a car accident, but the first twin like I feel sick or something like that, and later on finds out that his brother was in a car accident or something like that. But there's also been another study, and I wish I had more information on this, but they were tracking. There's like not seismometers, but what measures magnetic frequencies, whatever that is.
Seismic waves?
Yeah, it was something like that.
Electromagnetic frequencies?
Yeah, they have them. They have these devices all around the world, and they noticed during 9/11, like
I know, yeah.
during
I tell this story all the time.
Yeah, during the plane crash, and everyone kind of tuning in.
They're the polar readers. They're two satellites that are at the North and the South Pole, both to measure the magnetic frequency of the Earth. Mm-hmm. And obviously, everybody has electricity in their body. Everybody emits an electromagnetic frequency.
Yeah.
Yep. And don't let me steal your thunder.
Yeah. So when 9/11 happened, it was with the invention of the internet. It was a global event. It was like probably the first real live global event, because every TV, like for those of you that were around for 9/11, I remember very vividly, wherever you went, you could not escape the vision of the towers exploding.
Every TV everywhere.
I remember I worked at the hospital at that time, and I actually got called in because we didn't know, being so close to the situation, we didn't know if it was a terrorist attack, and it was all hands on deck. And even when I was working at the hospital, every TV in the hospital, we're talking 100 TVs in the hospital, every TV was tuned into it. I don't think if you change the channel, you probably couldn't go anywhere else.
On it, yeah.
So all over the internet, all over the places, every country around the world, every language spoken was talking about this event. And what they actually found was on the graph is always bouncing up and down. And then whatever reason was like 9/10 was the first plane they hit. From 9/10 to 11 something, I can't remember the exact time, the graph kind of went linear. Meaning we all perceived the same frequency. Yeah, we all had a collective consciousness of like, holy shit. I think that was everyone's thought at that point. And it's weird. It's weird to think that's the 100 monkey experiment, right? Just on a global scale, on an unfortunate global scale.
Cool stuff.
It's crazy to think, but it all comes back down to Atlantis, where it's the culture. It's not, yes, there was a physical place. Yes, the stories are probably real, but it's the culture of Atlantis that lives on to today. And unfortunately, we are losing more and more of the Lemurian culture, which we need. Because I feel like if we continue down the path of the Atlanteans, we're just going to self-destruct. And I don't know. It's just, it's crazy to think about it this way. Most people, if you talk about Atlantis today, they're like, oh yeah, it's like a fictional city somewhere in the ocean, right? Or that sank beneath the ocean.
Yeah.
Like they they brush it off as, oh yeah, it's just a story. Like, without even digging a little bit deeper, or even I would be willing to bet if you found 100 people on the street and you asked them what Atlantis is, nobody would actually even mention cultures, Eye of Africa, anything like that, right? Religions, nothing.
No, people would be like a myth.
Yeah, yeah, it's a myth.
I bet you most people haven't even heard of it.
Probably even heard of Plato.
Especially in 2018.
I know,
yeah.
right?
Plato? You mean like the stuff you mold in your hands?
Yeah, right.
Have a nice day.
Yeah. Oh my god. Yeah, so I feel like we are getting a little bit further, and I feel like this is why we started this podcast, is to kind of
spread
information, right?
Yeah. And also to talk about the stuff that we love talking about.
Yeah, right. And it's I don't know. Do you think this is a Lemurian way of thinking? Are we a Lemurian podcast?
I think so.
Because we're spreading information, trying to get people
to inform.
To wake up.
It's not about us.
No.
It's about everyone else,
Yeah.
Waking up the world one at a time,
Hopefully, and then that's what I was saying. Like, is the internet an Atlantic way of connecting consciousness? Is it because it's the mathematical tool to connect the people, and we just need to provide the spiritual.
Yeah, I'm kind of going back and forth with that. I think that it could be a very balanced tool, because you have a lot of good stuff on the internet that shows,
right.
Think of some of the sites that just post like motivational stuff or like inspiring stuff, like the Dodo or some shit.
Yeah, there's always cool stuff out there, but there's always shitty stuff out there.
Yeah.
It's a balance, isn't it?
Yeah. Right?
That's Lemurian. It would be a balance. But I'm wondering if it takes something, unfortunately, like another 9/11, but maybe on a bigger scale, to kind of pushes into that we are all one thinking. Like, we are, like, it's stupid to think we're fighting over, we're just fighting over nothing, really. We're fighting over finite resources within the earth. Yes, if my culture has a certain resource than yours, I can be superior over you, but it shouldn't be like that. It should be, we are the human race, and let's go together.
I think we're getting there.
I think we are too, and I think this is the beginning of it.
And I think science is also helping us get there, because we're starting to breach realms of science that are like almost very spiritual.
Yeah.
And, like, explain a lot of spiritual things.
But that's the Atlantean way of thinking of going science. But it's funny because when you start putting a few of the major like subjects of science, you have to have a little bit of that spirituality to complete your math.
Yeah, so there's still the balance there.
Yep. Well, think of guys like,
if we could just get people to understand simple things, okay? And as far as this "we are one" thing goes, like, and I've said this 100 times, but I'm gonna say it again, and you're gonna listen. Like, down to what we are made of, like to the very the particles, you know what I mean? Protons, neutrons, electrons.
Quarks.
Like quarks, and even those.
Strings.
All of those are made of different things that like go together to create something bigger and better than just itself. And then that goes on to create a molecule, and that, let's start with the atom, and the atom goes through the molecule creates the whatever is after that, cell maybe, or like amoeba, or I don't know. It's as far you go up, okay, cell, tissue, muscle, like organism, like, and then until it's you. All these different things going that don't have that. Maybe it's because they can't, but I don't know. You like all these different things that going outside just themselves to create something bigger until you have the body. And then you can go outside your body. You and I are friends, and you and I have connected to make this podcast to inform other people about things. We're doing that together, not just one person doing it. And beyond that, you live in a town. That town provides for one another to keep the town flourishing and water pumping and all that stuff. And you fucking keep going up the line.
Yeah,
everything affects everything. Everything is
a community.
one.
It's a community. Yeah.
You don't need to even research any of this shit to know that. Like, just
right.
Think about it for a second.
And it goes back to, if you see a hungry man in the street, feed him, right? Because if you feed him, he can now be productive, and he's going to be like, hey, that guy did a nice gesture for me. Maybe I can pass it along.
Exactly.
And it's something so simple, right? It's just as simple as doing a good deed for somebody else without ever expecting anything in exchange, right? Because like I've seen it plenty of times. You see people out there, begging for money and things like that. I don't necessarily give them money per se. I'm a little cheap because I don't really have anybody. But if somebody asks me like, hey, I'm a little hungry, I will buy them food, right?
Oh yeah, totally.
Like I remember going I think I went to like KFC one time, and there's a guy asking for like money or something like that. And I said, you know what? I was like, what do you like to eat here? And he told me, and I went in and I bought him food. And he came out, oh, thank you. How can I repay? I'm like, nothing. Don't worry about it. Like,
yeah, dude.
Sorry, I have to feed you KFC is the problem.
Yeah. You just, judging by your excitement about the KFC I just brought you, I'm doing better than you are. Don't worry about it.
Right. I'm not saying I'm always giving and stuff like that. Like,
no,
we all live hard lives.
The point you're trying to make is...
Yeah, like, I felt bad for him for whatever reason. I wanted to give him food, give him the ability to eat, because it sucks being, it sucks being, hungry. Like, who wants to be hungry? And when you're hungry, you're not productive. And when you're hungry, you're pissed off. And if you're pissed off, you can't help anyone else. You're not going to help somebody if you're hungry. Is the issue. So, but even like a small gesture like that can go a long way. Who knows? Maybe you feed him, and then he turns around and invent something amazing because now he had the time to think about something, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
but
maybe you feed him the meal that saves his life, and then he goes on to create something.
Right. Or maybe he becomes, a great leader in the future. We're all one. We're all connected. Or maybe he's, maybe he's one of
our actions.
Maybe he's an ascended master. You don't know. You give him food and he gives you knowledge.
We gotta get back to the Lemurian way of thinking, guys.
That's all those the crazy homeless people screaming. Maybe we should start listening to them.
Nah. I came across one of those guys the other day, and I was like, I want to walk the other way.
I almost got stabbed by one person.
Oh, good God.
It was in Providence, actually. Yeah.
That's not surprising.
Yeah, not at all, right?
Surprising.
Yeah. But I don't know. It's cool to theorize about all this stuff, and the actual the going back for religions and cultures, and when you start thinking of Atlantis being a culture and not just a place, even though it probably was an actual place, it's the culture that has spread on, and it's the greatness of the technology and the greatness of the city. It's not what you would think and imagine, like in the image of this image here. It's not quite that. It's more or less it's the culture spreading is what their greatest achievement was.
That's what kept the myth going on.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because even from Plato's uncle, Solon, I think he even said it predated the Egyptian Empire by a couple thousand years. Atlantis did.
Yeah, yeah.
Which would make sense because it puts in the same time period of when the Sahara had water. So
The dogs agree.
they always agree. I don't know. They're always a pain in the butt here, but
Guys, do some research on this. Sometimes listening to us two babble about this
just blabble on.
gets a little off track at times.
It does.
Seriously, do some research on this. I'm gonna a couple key points here. The Eye of Africa. Definitely look that up. That in my brain is hard evidence of where Atlantis could be. Like that's incredible. And again, geologically speaking, time-wise, like from a timeline,
geologically, structure,
everything
size,
does make sense. Really cool stuff here.
location.
And I found myself at the end of our pre-talk upstairs thinking, why is this not taught? This is so interesting. And I didn't start getting into this stuff until maybe like 9 years ago.
Yep.
I'll be 35 in July. Like, it took a while for me to even breach that surface, you know what I mean? But once you do, it's very interesting, and it's stuff that you notice is all intertwined within all these like things that you don't learn about in school. So do your own research.
Yes.
This stuff is good.
And then buy my book later this year. because all of this will be in there in way more detail, way more connections. Everything's going to be linked. It's going to be awesome.
I'm going to read it first and then tell you guys how it is.
Hopefully I get it finished, because like my plan is to write it over the summer, edit it over like September, October, November, and then have it published in December is the goal, maybe. So I'm gonna work hard. Doing the podcast definitely helps, because it helps put the thoughts in a better order, and it helps me with more research too, because the more research I do for the show, it helps with the book as well. And a lot of this actually came from the research I've previously done. But I agree with you. Like you said, you got into it like 9 years ago.
Yeah.
I was probably into it. I was probably more into it maybe in my later teens. But I started actually looking into it in my early teens. And it kind of took a side note, because obviously you're going through school, and school's hard.
Right.
And, it takes up a lot of your thought process. And if you start thinking about this stuff and your grades are crappy, then you got problems. But it wasn't actually until I actually, like, maybe after my college years is when I started to think more independently. And this is when I started doing more research on this stuff. And it's funny because, like, the more research you do, like you said, the more stuff you learn, the more you know. And it's hard to find people to talk about it, right? Like, I would say you and probably maybe one other person I know that I talk to in person actually even knows anything about this stuff, or even cares about this stuff, really. Every time I talk about anyone else about this stuff, they think I'm crazy. And I'm sure the viewers out there probably have similar aspects of this, right? Like, if you say, like, oh yeah, like, Atlantis is real, and I know where it is, and it's the culture, and if you go back even further, you have the Lemurian culture, you have all these things, people think you're nuts. But when you start looking at the details and the evidence behind it, you're just like, how can you refute against it? It's hard.
Well, because people think in very Atlantean ways.
Right,
they
linear.
need closure, they need facts, they need evidence. And when the Lemurians, again, think more faithfully. And what was that metaphor you were telling me upstairs? Like, their faith in God creates the God, which then gives them faith.
That creates
That creates the faith that gives them the faith in the God. Again,
it's circular.
It's circular, yeah.
Correct, yeah.
Cool stuff. Very cool stuff.
Yeah, and realistically, it comes down to the monotheistic religions and the power they're trying to hold today that suppresses a lot of the information. Not saying that the religion is evil itself. It's the way, the thought process behind the people of the religions. Again, Atlantean, one God, my God is the one God, your God is, or your gods are all bullshit. It's linear. It's my God or nothing. It's Atlantean thinking. And we need to go back to the Lemurian style, the Akhenaten style of everything is within us already, right? Everything that we possess is God. And it's not a person up in heaven looking down on us, creating different, lives or aspects of our lives, or, the fates. It's nothing like that. It's connected consciousness. We're all in it together, and ascending to that next dimension, that next level will give us it essentially will bring us to heaven. Heaven is the next level. Like when they say
ascending.
Yeah, it's ascending. like with even with like Jesus, right? Like Christ. How many religions out there have died 3 days later, was resurrected, right?
Yeah.
They didn't die and then come back to life as a zombie and was like, hey, look at me, he resurrected. No, they got to the next level. They put in the cheat codes, whatever it was, and they figured it out and got to the next level. And it's funny to see how this is progressing, right? Because a lot of people will take that literally, where they'll say, like, yeah, died, came back, and ascended to heaven. Well, what is heaven? And then when you ask them that question, they're like, oh, that's where, God and, all his children are. And you go, okay, then what is it? And they can't really explain it. But when you actually start talking about, like, dimensions and things like that, they think I'm crazy. Like, well, there's no dimensions in it. Like, we're talking about the same thing here. And that's the Lemurian way of thinking. And we need to get back to understanding consciousness and understanding that there is more to this life than just this world and what we see around us. And, the internet is a good way to start going through this. There's a lot of bad on the internet, but there's a lot of good. There is a balance there. And I hope, things that we discussed and things that we talk about help you find and research and maybe even start looking into things on your own and beginning to, I don't know, get the knowledge and maybe start thinking collectively more Lemurian, more female brained, right? I guess that's where we're at.
Hopefully we'll get there, man. Remember, it's all about balance, though.
It is about balance, and
Gotta have both.
that's the key. So on that note, I think we're out of here, right?
That about does it. We had a relatively long one today. A lot of stuff to cover. We will see y'all
It's
next
cool.
time.